Should we be changing our stance on any of the values for the 2021 rookie quarterback class? That is what we're going to be getting into today. I am your host, Chris Allen, here with the Dynasty Newsletter. And typically, right now, I'd be kicking it over to Adam Wilde, but of course, he's on assignment tonight. So, y'all got me here to discuss this value change or possible value change with the rookie quarterback class. And we'll start off with the Sunday night. I don't know if it was dramatic or not, but depending on who you talk to, Mac Jones in the battle or the duel or whatever you want to call it, like with Tom Brady last night in the rain, low scoring game. I mean, it was very intense to watch, but just the evaluation of Mac Jones could be on either side, depending on which side that you fell on. And I think the important thing for us as dynasty managers take into account is instead of looking at one, just looking at a small sample and looking at just a single game, but two, let's go all the way back to our pre-draft evaluation of Mac Jones. If you were happen to have checked this out, both myself and Adam, back in the early months of the offseason and even through the draft process, like when Mac Jones wound up falling, didn't get drafted by San Francisco and wound up falling to the Patriots. It was, well, what were his strengths? What were Mac Jones' strengths coming out of Alabama? I mean, did we think that he could execute a quick passing offense? Absolutely. Do we think that he would be able to make pre-snap reads and understand what the defense is giving him? Absolutely. Pocket management? Absolutely. All of those were strengths of Mac Jones. And we saw that all on display last night for Sunday night, like during the game against one of the teams or one of the defenses that could dial up the most pressure against quarterbacks, wound up getting after the passer. We saw Mac Jones able to sidestep a lot of the pressure, wind up connecting with his receivers on a continuous basis. So at least from that standpoint, we're seeing Mac Jones develop as a passer at the professional level. But of course, we haven't seen the big games yet. We haven't seen the 300-yard passing games. We haven't seen the multi-touchdown games that can wind up, vaulting him into the quarterback one conversation. And I think that's where the polarity winds up skewing our view of Mac Jones. And I think that's where we need to wind up in somewhere in the middle in terms of creating some sort of compromise as to how we look at Mac Jones. And just to kind of aid the discussion, I mean, let's just go ahead and pull up. I mean, this is one of the things that I try and use when looking at quarterbacks or even just just passers in general. I mean, their passing charts as provided by Next Gen Stats at least gives you some idea of what they're doing, what their strengths, what their weaknesses are. And if you look at literally like any one of his passing charts, of course, like one of the big knocks against him from a fantasy perspective is that, yes, we'll see the volume. We'll see these like 39 attempts here, or even here in week 2, what was it? Like another 30 attempts here. Heck, he's passing more than Jameis Winston as of right now. I mean, he can't get over 22 pass attempts. I mean, so we're seeing the volume. I mean, but in some cases, we're not really seeing not seeing the production or not seeing the fantasy production that we would want to start him on our fantasy rosters. And so while that's been the case, I mean, 51 attempts here in week 3, but where are we seeing most of the efficiency at? Where are we seeing the things that Mac Jones, a rookie, 4th start in the NFL, where are we seeing the things that he's improving at, and where are we seeing the things that he's good at? Well, it is those intermediate passes. It is those short passes to Jacoby Myers, to Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, even though on a couple of those passes, especially in week 3, wound up turning into either a pick six or an interception to either one of the tight ends. But either way, if you look at what he was capable of doing, if you look at what he was asked to do within that Bill Belichick-led offense, I mean, that is what he's been able to capitalize on. He was never known for having at least a strong arm or an arm to generate enough velocity to hit on some of those deep throws. So the expectation, or at least from what we've been hearing around the league, and even seeing some of the discussion shortly after the game, I mean, looking at Boston.com's, I mean, looking at like the storylines or the headlines coming out of that game, where it's what it means that Mac Jones has almost outdueled Tom Brady. I mean, it adds the drama. I mean, of course, I understand that after a game like that with Tom Brady, the Patriots coming back to Foxborough after leaving to Tampa Bay, 100%, and Mac Jones is the one caught in the middle of that like Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Patriots vortex. I 100% understand. But trying to, I guess, paint a picture of something that Mac Jones isn't at this point in his career, it seems like we're getting a bit ahead of our skis, where it's just that's where he's at right now, what he's capable of doing, what he's capable of producing. He is completing the passes or executing the offense within the design of the offense. Outside of structure, no, he's not there yet. And that's okay. Deep balls, not there yet. And that's also okay. I think the one big thing to take out of last night's game were the positives. Yes, pockets management, absolutely 100% there. Being able to execute on quick throws. We saw the pre-snap reads, which turned into fast throws to either Jacoby Myers or whether it could have been Nelson Aguilar or even any one of the tight ends, especially Jonnu Smith on the touchdown pass. Those are the things that we'd expected to see, and we did see that. But it's just the ascension or the development, the evolution of Mac Jones as a passer. That is yet to happen. But in 4 starts, absolutely. I mean, again, we're asking a bit too much as of right now. I do think that part of the reason for that is we've seen other rookie passers come out in the past and wind up producing almost straight out of the gate. And while that's been great for fantasy purposes, again, we need to look at the context of the offense. We need to look at the context of his particular situation. Are we truly expecting Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar to be the gas that winds up pushing Mac Jones into that QB1 conversation on a weekly basis? I can't see it, and I know most folks, if they take a realistic look at his situation, take the context of his situation, and even though that the Patriots are top 5 in both pass rate over expectation, neutral passing rate, the volume is going to be there, as I mentioned beforehand. But still, we need to look at what that offense is expected to do. We looked at what Cam Newton was doing with the Patriots last year. It wasn't one of those, I mean, we're going to be super aggressive, passing downfield. I mean, that wasn't typically a part of that offense even last year. So trying to shoehorn a 180 turn into that Patriots offense was not going to happen overnight, especially not within the first month of Mac Jones now being the starter. So going back to how we should view, and like that's the actionable part, like that's the part I want to discuss. Is, I mean, one way we can take a look at it. Let's pop on over to our rankings here at Footballguys. So if you hop on over to Footballguys, and of course I'll plug the site here in just a little bit because that's what we do here. I mean, we do have Dynasty Rankings available here from some of our analysts, Jeff Tiller and a couple other folks. I mean, but if we wind up looking at like where they sit, I mean, of course we'll get to Trey Lance here in a little bit. Okay, Trevor Lawrence obviously like sitting there up at the top. I mean, Mac Jones actually does fall fourth rather, because I see Justin Fields up here as well. 4th in the ranks in terms of like where we have them ranked from a dynasty perspective. And quite honestly, I mean, that makes sense if you look at again, contextualizing from a fantasy sense, like what those guys are going to be capable of doing here in the near future. We're already seeing Trey Lance be able to provide some production on his legs. The same thing, not necessarily for Justin Fields. We know it's there, but again, I'll talk about Justin Fields here in a little bit, but therein lies part of the issue is that where do you see, or where can we possibly see like Mac Jones evolving as a passer? And with him currently sitting here, and after seeing what happened last night, I do believe that it winds up putting him in a position where if you do want to take a shot on him now would be the time to do it. After seeing what he's capable of doing just within the bounds of the offense and what we can see him doing here in the future as he continues to ascend, as he continues to learn more, then yes, I think that production that we're expecting, any of the intermediate throws, and any of the, I guess, the shots that can propel him into the quarterback one conversation. I mean, that should be on the way for him. So if you think that's a part of it, throw out an offer for Mac Jones at this point. I mean, if we can already see the floor is there for him, then the ceiling is what should come as he continues to learn more, as he continues to develop as a passer. And so with that, I mean, I do believe that at least from an actionable standpoint, Mac Jones, like while he might be a guy that's sitting on like some folks' benches or like, the back end of their roster from a quarterback perspective, I think acquiring him now at a cheaper cost can be something that winds up paying off dividends later, because you can see like what he does offer that offense. And if they continue to add to their player personnel, that's not always going to be Jacoby Myers and Nelson Aguilar. I mean, the tight ends, sure, they'll continue to help. But if they continue to add more pieces like to that offense and stabilize that offense, like Mac Jones can wind up being the quarterback that, at the very least, a viable quarterback too, as he continues to develop. So before I move on to the other quarterbacks, because we're going to wind up getting to all 5 of them here today, I wanted to give a shout out to Joe Bryant and the rest of Footballguys staff for putting together the email list that winds up fueling a lot of this content that you see here on this show. So the Dynasty Newsletter, I mean, that's what Adam and I do on a weekly basis. Of course, Adam out on assignment tonight, but that's what we wind up talking about, or pulling a lot of the information from in order to give you guys the content that you need, that we discuss here on a weekly basis. So if you get a chance, hop on over to Footballguys, footballguys.com. Fill in your information. It's a free email update that you can get on almost a daily basis. And as we continue to learn and collect more information, as soon as we know more, you'll find that in your inbox so that we can help you do most of the work without having to do the research on your own. All right, so let's go ahead and get on into it with the Chicago Bears. And I know that a lot of folks are probably still, just shaking their heads and just trying to figure out like what is going on with Matt Nagy, Justin Fields, and how they're supposed to approach this quarterback situation. Because even now, Justin Fields looks like he has made some minor improvements in terms of pocket management. And also we saw at least a shift in the offensive game planning. It's still looking like Matt Nagy is like still wanting to declare Andy Dalton the starter as after yesterday's game. Matt Nagy saying that he wants to evaluate both Andy Dalton's injury, and then he'll make a decision later on the week, Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe, as to who's going to be the starter in this upcoming week in week 5. And I can understand a lot of folks' consternation, like with the idea that after seeing improvement, because it couldn't get worse after the week 3 debacle where Justin Fields wound up getting sacked 7, 8, 9 times in his very first start in the NFL. But I think the big thing, the key here is it's twofold. One, Justin Fields improving as a quarterback, seeing the game for what it is, taking what he can against the defense. And of course, if you're going up against the Lions defense, I can understand like how you would see that in the box score, but it's also in the mechanics. It's also in the fundamentals of being able to read the defense that we saw more out of Justin Fields in week 4. And with Bill Lazor now calling the shots, or at least putting together the game plan for Justin Fields, that seems to work a bit more than what we saw from Matt Nagy and Justin Fields in week 3. I want to point out at least one play that's provided by Mark Schofield, who works for Footballguys. He winds up producing at least just wonderful content. And if any folks, if you're listening to this show, you have to be following Mark. Go ahead and check him out on Twitter. I'm not going to play the entire video, but for most folks, especially Bears fans, if you watched any of the plays like from Sunday, you guys probably already know like which play I'm going to be talking about. It's this whole shot that Justin Fields wound up taking, I think midway through the second or third quarter, if I'm remembering correctly, where, as Mark already has it outlined, they have a cover 2 defense that winds up or at least it shifts into a cover 2 later, but then Justin Fields winds up dropping this ball right inside of a tight window, to Allen Robinson down the right-hand side. That is the type of play that you would expect to see from somebody like Justin Fields. We knew he was an accurate quarterback. Again, going back to my process, in trying to outline how we should be valuing these quarterbacks here tonight, is going back to our pre-draft process. Do we have concerns about Justin Fields being an accurate quarterback? No. Do we have concerns about Justin Fields being an accurate deep ball passer? Absolutely not. Do we have concerns about Justin Fields as a runner, as a scrambler, even just as a natural athlete, having to avoid the pass rush, and if he needed to pick up a few yards on his legs? No, we had none of those concerns when he was coming out of Ohio State. So in seeing that he was able to, one, manage the pocket a bit better, again, contextualizing it because he was going up against the Lions defense, I 100% understand that, but also seeing, again, the minor things or the details, that nuance that was now a part of his game here in week 4. Those are the things that, from a dynasty perspective, we need to see, because after a complete faceplant in the prior week, you would expect to see that level of improvement. While again, it doesn't show up in the stat sheet, right? Because he only had so many attempts in week 4. There wasn't a ton of volume. That the Chicago Bears, they don't have the same passing rate over expectation as the Patriots do. So you wouldn't expect to see at least that massive production. But we saw, again, even if you look at Darnell Mooney's stat sheet more so than Allen Robinson's, we can see that the deep shots, or that connection, that beautiful, beautiful accuracy that he has on intermediate and deep throws of 15 air yards or more, that skill still has translated over from the collegiate level. So if we go back to, again, taking a look at what he was capable of doing in college, are we seeing those same things here in the NFL? And after a couple of starts under his belt, Justin Fields clearly showed, like, it's clearly been able to show that that part is there, like, for him. And so that's where I think the optimism should be for dynasty managers moving forward. It's just that now, can they wind up creating the the environment around him that he needs in order to succeed? And by that, I mean, are they going to start to call more play action, more boot action, like, for him? Because even in week 4, that was still a minimal part of the game plan. While it might be more of a galaxy brain or tinfoil hat like type of take, it does look like Matt Nagy wants to keep the game plan as much as possible so that if Andy Dalton needed to be available, he could shoehorn Andy Dalton back into the game plan. But that's just my personal take. Either way, if they can wind up putting him in a position to win by using more of that or integrating more of those concepts into the Bears passing attack, then we should start to see more and more of the elements that made Justin Fields a prolific passer in college, and why we were so excited for him to come out in the draft this past year. So where do we go from here? What is the path forward like for Justin Fields, at least from our perspective as dynasty managers, because we use the actionable part. So again, let's go back and consult the rankings. Let's go ahead and look at what we at Footballguys like have for him. So hopping back on footballguys.com. So again, I love using like some of this stuff in order to like base my decisions off of, because seeing how other folks view some of these players, I think it's what can help you, or it definitely helps me as a dynasty manager figure out, all right, well, here's what, at least in some sense, in some fashion, the market is currently shifting, or at least how we can see some of these quarterbacks. And so as of right now, as I mentioned beforehand, so we've got Trevor Lawrence like here up at the top spot, at least in terms of the rookie quarterbacks. Trey Lance here at quarterback 2 from that particular rookie class, then Justin Fields like shortly behind him. Now, I don't know if I agree with this so far, just because of the situation that we find that Justin Fields finds himself in. We know that the ceiling exists, and if Justin Fields were to hit his ceiling, he would and should be at least in the 2-3 conversation, like from this particular class. But with the way that we've seen things shake out, not just for him, right? But look at the coaching situation, look at the personnel that's currently there. We don't know, one, like how Matt Nagy or what the future offensive coordinator or future coaching staff of the Bears is going to look like here in 2022 or moving forward. We're assuming it's going to be better. Matt Nagy isn't going to be a part of it. We can wind up seeing more and more of the things that made Justin Fields great in college. But without knowing what that situation is going to look like, what Allen Robinson's situation is going to look like in 2022 and moving forward as well, I mean, it does put some sort of uncertainty on his situation. So, I mean, if you are one of the folks that, if you're a dynasty manager that currently has Justin Fields on their roster, of course you're holding right now. Not advising for you to move off of them. But I would say for other folks, unlike the Mac Jones situation, where it's just, you can already envision a situation where the Patriots continue to add pieces, they can bolster the offensive line, Mac Jones continues to ascend or evolve as a passer, his situation improves. Justin Fields, there are additional steps that need to be put in place in order for that to happen. It's not as straightforward of a path as it is for Mac Jones. I don't see the same upside, or at least immediate upside, as I would with somebody like Mac Jones, even though from a dual threat nature, from a dual threat standpoint, from an offensive standpoint, if we were to put the same in a vacuum and just look at them objectively, Justin Fields would be the one that we want for fantasy purposes, but we can't see that moving forward as of right now. So I can't recommend trading for him either. It just seems like at this point, unless you're just dying to have, or you want to take a shot on him, okay, fine. Otherwise, it just seems like it's easy for everybody to just hold pat. We'll see what happens with the coaching staff, and then afterwards we're going to move forward. But no change. I don't say it's a downgrade whatsoever, because we've seen the micro changes, the incremental changes, like to Fields as a passer. Again, just within the first couple of games, of course, small sample size, but those are the things that we need to see from him in order to make sure that the capability is still there, the ability itself is still there for him as a passer. So for right now, it's easier for us to just hold tight, wind up seeing how that offense shakes out over like the course of this season and where the coaching staff like winds up taking him and helping him develop, assuming that we don't wind up getting completely torpedoed with an Andy Dalton taking over and taking the majority of the starts. I do think that Justin Fields is going to be fine. I have to root for him because he's from, he comes from Ohio, but still, or at least graduated from Ohio State, but still. All right. So moving on, let's look at Trey Lance. And I think Trey Lance is one of those cases where, man, we honestly just don't know. To be quite honest, I am confused at the entire situation because after the draft, after all of the drama surrounding San Francisco moving up to number 3, they wind up taking Trey Lance. It's, the Kyle Shanahan acting like he's completely confused as to why folks had thought that Mac Jones was going to be drafted there at 3. But then we get this quote from the San Jose Mercury News, like shortly after Trey Lance's, not say first start, right? He wound up coming in for Jimmy Garoppolo midway through the first half after Garoppolo gets run up on or gets like hurt like in his calf. And then we wind up seeing Trey Lance for the majority of their contest against Seattle. But after that game, Kyle Shanahan's remarks doesn't really sound like he's getting any sort of confidence like from Kyle Shanahan, from his head coach, saying that he looked like a typical rookie. And then the part that kills me that comes after, he says that's why he's a number 2 quarterback, not a quarterback or not a rookie quarterback or not even my quarterback. He's a number 2 quarterback. Like, it's just, wow. I don't know how to approach that sort of situation, like with all things considered, right? Like after the move up to 3, essentially mortgaging what should be like a productive future for like any of the quarterbacks they were selected. They wind up taking Trey Lance. Everything seems to line up when we talked about or when we discussed Trey Lance getting drafted by the 49ers back in the early parts of the offseason. And this is the comment that we get from Kyle Shanahan. Now, was he wrong in saying so after looking at the production that Lance had against Seattle? No, okay, fine, sure. He wound up completely missing on a couple of passes to Deebo Samuel. It took him a few drives, like full drives, in order to get in rhythm with the offense. I mean, there were a few handoffs, or like once they wound up using like some of that play action and also trying to incorporate like Lance as a runner, he just seemed at the very least jittery as a passer. So I can understand like why Shanahan would at least have like that level of critique like for Trey Lance. But it's just, where was that development, or why wasn't there more development like put towards like Trey Lance like during the offseason? And of course, like we did wind up hearing a ton of hints like towards the back end of the offseason indicating that Lance wasn't ready. But man, it's just very difficult to see like where that ceiling is going to be. Like even with like Jimmy Garoppolo banged up and him indicating that what Jimmy Garoppolo said, it might take a couple of weeks, but apparently Dr. Garoppolo was wrong in that assessment. Kyle Shanahan indicating they might be ready to go here in week 5. So let's go all the way back to our pre-draft evaluation. Adam and I both talked about like what Trey Lance is capable of doing. Like, from an arm talent perspective, do we still think did we think even back in the offseason, did we think that Trey Lance had the arm talent in order to be at the very least a passer in the league, or a passer like in a Kyle Shanahan led offense? Absolutely. And we saw flashes of that in week 4. Do we think that he could be able to operate in the Kyle Shanahan offense, like using his skills as a runner? Absolutely. And that's what made him the ideal fit. Justin Fields, well, depending on who you talk to, Justin Fields might have been a better fit, but that's a whole different conversation. But that dual threat ability in order to run those play action, those bootleg action like type of plays that can wind up turning an efficient offense, because Jimmy Garoppolo was top 12 in efficiency back in 2019, like when they wound up making the Super Bowl run. I mean, they could take that offense and really turn it into something that could be almost unstoppable. Like, should a passer like Trey Lance, if Trey Lance could match Jimmy Garoppolo from a passing perspective, but also still add that talent on the ground, then of course now we're looking at an offense that most defensive coordinators would just be absolutely, I mean, blown away, or at least have trouble trying to design a defense to come against. Because if you could see here in week 4, I mean, on the, 75-yard touchdown to Deebo Samuel, and also even the short touchdown later, but it's just on that drive, at least in order to get them there to the second touchdown to Deebo Samuel. You saw the pieces of those games, saw the pieces of those skills like still there, translating from his time at NDSU. I mean, that's what we wanted to see. But where's the ceiling at? Or where's the, similar to the Justin Fields conversation that we were just having, it's like, what is the path for him in order to start more games? And if we're not seeing that same vote of confidence from their head coach, like from the head coach all the way down, Kyle Shanahan is essentially like what the head coach, offensive coordinator, so on and so forth. He controls that offense. And if we're not seeing that same level of confidence for Trey Lance, well, we might think the ceiling is there once he's ready. But there's no confidence that that's actually going to happen. There's no confidence that even if Jimmy Garoppolo was fully healthy, that Kyle Shanahan would just snap decision. He winds up taking Trey Lance over him, and Trey Lance is the one that's going to be starting. And unfortunately, despite the fact that Trey Lance was an efficient quarterback from an EPA per play perspective, he wound up having a top 12 or at least above league average from an efficiency standpoint, was accurate on most of the passes that he threw, and that is all great and that's all fine. But if you are still getting these types of comments like from your head coach, and the fact that you're not ready in order to take over for the starter, despite the fact that even when Jimmy Garoppolo was in, he threw just a nasty pick like over the middle, that's where we need to see more. We need to see more of that development from him moving forward. We need to make sure that he's capable of taking on that load. So while, again, we saw those incremental steps moving forward, it's difficult in order to say that, yep, I'm going to wind up taking a chance on Trey Lance, or even the folks that drafted Trey Lance. Because if we go back to most of the rookie drafts that wound up happening during the offseason, if it was Trevor Lawrence going at the 101, 102 in Superflex leagues, it was Trey Lance going shortly after him as the quarterback 2, like in this rookie class. So while he might have been that was the cost like for him at that point, at the very least, I'm asking the same question of that we were just asking of Justin Fields. Where's the path to starting more games? Where's the other than injury? Like, where is that path to starting more games? Where is that path in order to taking over that offense and then being able to execute that offense in the same fashion? And so even if we wind up looking at like from a statistical standpoint, or even just the eye test, because there were a number of plays that Lance wound up missing on, it just, again, looked like he wasn't ready. He needs more starts like under his belt. So if he winds up getting the start in week 5, if he gets the nod in week 5 and he winds up producing or actually being able to run the offense like after a full week as the starter, then absolutely. But it's just as of right now, we're not changing our value of Trey Lance because that ceiling is still there. He's still a part of that offense that we know that once we have a dual threat quarterback under center for the San Francisco 49ers, that's an offense that we want to buy into. Even though with Brandon Ayuk still not getting a ton of work, it's still mostly Deebo Samuel, George Kittle banged up as well. That is still an offense that we want to be have pieces of, because we know it can be that productive if we can wind up getting an asset attached to it. So with Justin Fields, and as I mentioned earlier, he is our quarterback 2. No change there either. But it's just where's that development going to get you to the point where he winds up having that ceiling type game. But he would be, from an actionable standpoint, he would be the type of quarterback and with his current path that I would want to trade for and wind up seeing that if any sort of dynasty manager with him on his roster, could you wind up negotiating some sort of deal for him at this point? It might be difficult because we've already seen glimpses of that. Even just in the 3 quarters that he played, wound up with 150 yards and a touchdown, even though he threw a pick as well, and also had some yards on the ground as well. That's what we were expecting to see. And if that's his floor, it might be difficult in order to pry him away from any particular manager. But I do think that, given that the quotes like this, anything moving forward that might wind up being a detractor for him moving forward, it makes it difficult for us, for any dynasty manager to confidently start him. So if there's a way in order for you to pry him away, I would definitely throw a trade offer their way and see what can possibly happen. All right, couple more to go and we'll see what we got here. But first, I want to talk about any of the other shows. Look at all this content that we've got going out right now. Appreciate y'all checking me out here today. Again, Adam Wilde on assignment here at the Dynasty Newsletter. This is what the fantasy for the Footballguys network. we have just content coming out every day. If it's not this show, we've got Chad Parsons and Jordan McNamara on the Dynasty on their Dynasty show. I mean, of course, I mean the shows that we all grew up on, at least for me personally, like being a part of the fantasy industry, growing up and listening to the Audible with Sigmund Bloom and Cecil Lammy. You can catch me on the Thursday night show with Sig Bloom, Cecil, not Cecil actually, but Matt Wallman, Dr. Gene as well, providing the injury aspect. So, I mean, take a look at the YouTube channel. Subscribe, click that subscribe button so you know when we're coming on. Any of the other shows we've got going on here, the Mailbag Show with Troy King, Dave Kluge, any of those other types of content that you need in order to help make sure you're making the right moves for your roster from an in-season perspective. That's what we're here to do. That's what we're here to try and help you with. All right, so where we got next? Zach Wilson, they finally get the W. The Jets, I mean, the 27-24, I mean, in a game that had, if I'm remembering the math correctly, 153 plays executed in that game, which is absolutely wild to think about because, I mean, the Jets, not to say that they're a fast-paced team, but they're definitely not one that we would consider to have a ton of plays associated with them. Same with the Titans, with having Derrick Henry as the face of that particular offense. But I mean, they wind up getting their very first victory. And I think this from Glenn Naughton here, like this storyline or the headline here, I mean, they get their first win with Zach Wilson as the defensive line dominates. I think that encapsulates where Zach Wilson is currently at, because while they wound up winning, it was the Jets defensive line, 7 sacks, if I'm remembering correctly, on Ryan Tannehill, which wound up giving the Jets offense enough drives in order to wind up capping off that win in overtime. But for Zach Wilson, especially, it's difficult in order to get behind why the Jets wound up taking Zach Wilson here at the 102 in the 2021 drafts. And if we go back and take a look at, again, going back to the pre-draft process, looking at what we thought of Zach Wilson as a passer. And one of the caveats to a lot of the production that Zach Wilson had at BYU was the fact that they had one of the best offensive lines in college at the time, throughout his tenure there at BYU, and allowed him to create or rack up a ton of much of his production. Now, of course, that's not to say that Zach Wilson, the only reason why that he was able to do what he did in college was because of that offensive line. But let's caveat that. Let's contextualize Zach Wilson's production in saying that was a part of his game, or at least why he was able to do what he did. And so going from BYU to the Jets, within the first week or two, they wound up having multiple injuries along the offensive line. And then after that, we see a lot of that deterioration almost back to what we saw with Sam Darnold in years past. I mean, Zach Wilson wound up having, the past 3 games, he's had multiple interceptions. He actually wound up throwing yet another interception this past week. So while he still has much to learn from a pocket management perspective, which, going back to pre-draft evaluations, we expected to see some growing pains with Zach Wilson because he does have that as a possible issue, shifting from an offensive line that was able to provide him protection on it, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds without having to face any sort of pressure, now to having a top 16, top 17 pressure rate in the league, and seeing him fold under that pressure. Can understand, again, within just 4 games, that I can understand why he is back towards the back of the league in completion percentage over expected. The offense has looked, at least from a production standpoint, and also from an efficiency standpoint, is well below the league average. And also, come on now, let's also caveat that with the fact that they have had one of the toughest schedules to start off the year, especially if you are a rookie coming out. I mean, who did they start off with? So they had Carolina, New England, and then Denver as their first 3. And now Carolina, we kind of saw that particular defense was somewhat fool's gold, when they played against Dallas. But still, they did have enough up front in order to generate pressure. And then, of course, New England versus Bill Belichick. Come on now. And then also the Denver defensive front before they've also got injured as well. So I do think it's understandable, given what we've seen from a defensive standpoint, or the matchups that he's had to face, and then now what the production is. And so, since, again, going back to our rankings here over at Footballguys, in order to see what should we really expect, or where's the value for Zach Wilson. And if we're looking at, again, let's go ahead and pull up those rankings and see what we have for Zach Wilson. So in rankings, Dynasty Rankings, And then right now for Zach Wilson, we do have him as, let's see, so there's Trevor Lawrence here at number 9, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, and then if we have to zoom on, come all the way back down. So yeah, the quarterback 4 out of this class. Yes, it should be the quarterback 4. Quarterback 5, actually, take that back. That is where, I mean, I think it's understandable. And what are we doing with Zach Wilson? Again, getting to the actionable portion of the conversation. Nobody's moving for him at this point. Where's the where's the evolution? Where's the ceiling play like for a guy like Zach Wilson? Where Corey Davis, while he has been a good piece or a good find for that offense, we're not seeing, or we can't project him to be a wide receiver 1 that's going to, 1, command the targets, 2, create on those targets to the point where he winds up having one of those ceiling games that can vault Zach Wilson into that quarterback 1 discussion. They're not even featuring Denzel Mims at this point. So it's looking at the personnel around him. What can we really expect in order for him to wind up being in that quarterback 1 conversation, where at the very least, if you squint at Mac Jones, he already has at least some facsimile of that personnel sitting around him with, again, like we talked earlier, Jacoby Myers can be at least a decent wide receiver 2. Nelson Aguilar can get deep on a few plays, got the 2 tight ends. So at least the infrastructure is there, but they just need to make improvements. With the Jets, they still need the infrastructure. They still need a prominent like wide receiver 1 or a dominant or alpha wide receiver 1 on that offense. We can't even really get any sort of production out of their backfield. We saw glimpses of Michael Carter and what he could be, but still we need to see more of that. So the infrastructure is still there. So there's still multiple steps behind the Patriots. Always have been, to be quite honest. But either way, it's just, you're not going to be moving for him at this point. I mean, you're not going to be trading him away because what are you going to be reliably getting back at this point? So no, our value isn't shifting, but it's just understanding the context of what Zach Wilson, his situation, what he needs to do as a quarterback in order to elevate his particular game. And then that's where we can take it from there afterwards. All right. And the last quarterback we're going to get to, I mean, the winless Jacksonville Jaguars. I mean, he talks about his 4th straight loss after losing at the very last minute to my Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday night. I mean, he's saying that they're right there, according to Patrick Walker. Sure. I mean, I could possibly see that. It's just that, again, they need, especially after losing DJ Chark, it's the personnel around him. I'm not talking about the wide receiver. Sure, we'll see what Marvin Jones can provide like on his own now without having DJ Chark opposite him. Laviska Shenault, glad to see him come back into the fold with a decent game on Thursday night. But they also need the infrastructure there. That offensive line still putting Trevor Lawrence in bad situations and having him be at least over the top half in terms of pressure rate, like over the his first 4 games as an NFL quarterback. But also, where's the development for Trevor Lawrence? Again, one of the things that, like, while we were able to see him connect on multiple deep balls to Marvin Jones throughout the first 3 weeks, I mean, even still, like his clean pocket, during clean pockets, like his accuracy was subpar. So we need to see some development there. On Thursday night, we actually saw like better touch like from him there. But the other part to Trevor Lawrence, where's the mobility? At Clemson, that was one of his strong points. Like if he was able to manage the pocket, and if the pocket did collapse, he was able to score to get past the defensive line, and then wind up picking up yards on his own. And actually, we didn't. In each week, actually, the number of design runs has started to increase. We didn't see that at all in week 1. It's actually gone up to, I think, incrementally each week. They've added more design runs into his game to the point where we actually saw him scamper into the end zone on his own against Cincinnati. Now, if that part is going to be integrated into his game, his value as the quarterback 1 out of this class stabilizes, at least for me, because that's where we can, I guess, from a fantasy standpoint, forgive the interceptions, where he's had at least 1 interception in each game, if I'm also remembering that correctly as well. So it's just, that's where, against the interceptions, like while from a real football stance, you definitely don't want to see the inaccuracy continue to be a problem for Trevor Lawrence. But if they're going to continue to call design runs, especially once they get into the red zone, and if he's also going to be at least scrambling more and producing more on the ground, at least from a fantasy standpoint, that stabilizes his value, that keeps him at least on our radar from a quarterback perspective, and one that we would want to start on a weekly basis. Because as of right now, with over, I think the last check that I had done, over 50% of their, like close to 40 to between 40 and 50% of their plays had been in negative game scripts because their defense is still giving up like close to 250 passing yards like per game, and that's just passing yards. We're not even getting into the scrimmage yards portion yet. But since they're giving so much from a defensive perspective, they wind up putting Trevor Lawrence in those positions where he is having to throw his way out of games, or at least to keep them in games. And so since their passing rate over expectation has been more of the league average, they have been struggling in order to, I guess, generate enough production on offense in order to even get out to a lead. Cincinnati was the first time we actually had seen them wind up mounting a lead against their opponents, to the point where they can actually try and sit on it or play the ball that play the type of football that they prefer to do. So seeing that development from Trevor Lawrence, seeing him actually used more as a runner and actually providing more of that dual threat ability, that's the type of evolution that I would expect to see. Again, only a 4-game sample, completely understand that, but that's what you would expect to see out of your passers. So since we do have him ranked, and as everybody had him ranked coming out of college, like throughout this draft process, as the quarterback one of this class, I mean, that's what you would want to see. So for Trevor Lawrence, his value is completely, it stays the same, doesn't change a bit for me. But you do want to see more, like less of those errant throws, less of those interceptions, so that he can be a part of the quarterback two discussion on a weekly basis. So while he has been sitting in the 16, 17, 18 ranks in terms of the quarterbacks, that's where we want to see more of that production. We want to see more of those points being scored. And so from there, we can wind up actually talking about him as a quarterback one, assuming that the personnel improves, because he, along with Mac Jones, needs less in order for us to consider him in that particular discussion on a weekly basis. They just need to add some more from the receiver core, add some more to the offensive line. We'll see what they wind up doing with Travis Etienne once he comes back in 2022, but no changes there. So before I get on out of here today, wanted to at least give you guys a quick shout in order to take a look at the Footballguys mobile app. Go ahead and check that out wherever you can download apps onto your phone. We've got the Draft Dominator, but it also provides some in-season management tips for you as well. So go ahead and download the Footballguys Dominator, Footballguys app, wherever you can check those out, and then see what we can do for you, providing some of that expert analysis. Again, any of that other stuff that you need, like from an in-season standpoint, conducting trades, so on and so forth, that's what you need. That's what we can provide there as well. So, all right. So I appreciate you guys coming and kicking it with me tonight. I'm Chris Allen. You can find me on Twitter at ChrisAllenFFWX. Next week, Adam Wilde will be back with me so we can give you some more of that news that you need from a dynasty perspective. And so, all right, I'll catch y'all next week. Peace.